Little girl said, "Sir, my mom didn't come home last night." The CEO followed her into the snow. P.2 the man and the little girl walked in silence through the snow-covered streets, the crunch of their footsteps the only sound that filled the cold night air. As they reached the corner of the street, the man glanced down at the girl, her eyes wide with worry and uncertainty. She kept glancing up at him, as if hoping he could make everything better. He could feel the weight of her gaze, and it made him want to do something, anything, to reassure her. He had never been one to interact with children, let alone a lost one in the middle of a snowstorm. But something about her innocence stirred a strange sense of responsibility within him. "We're almost there," he said, his voice gentle but firm. The little girl nodded, her small feet struggling to keep up with his long strides. As they turned the corner, he noticed a small, dilapidated building in the distance. It was a homeless shelter, a place where people like him rarely found themselves. But tonight, it seemed like the only option. The girl stopped walking, her eyes focused on the building. "That's where my mom usually takes me when we don't have anywhere else to go," she said softly. The man looked at the building, his expression unreadable. He had been wealthy for so long that places like this never crossed his mind. He didn't know what it was like to feel truly desperate, to be without a home, without security. But standing there with the girl, he suddenly felt a glimpse of what it might be like. "Let's go inside, get warm, and figure out what we can do next," he said, his tone more comforting than before. The girl nodded silently, looking up at him as they entered the shelter. Inside, the warmth hit them immediately, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. The shelter was humble, but it was a safe haven for people who had nowhere else to turn. The man helped the girl remove her thin coat and led her to a small seating area by the window. He sat down beside her, unsure of what to say. The girl seemed to sense his unease and looked up at him with a small smile. "Thank you for helping me," she said softly. "You're the only person who's been kind to me tonight." The man gave a small, tight-lipped smile in return. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just doing what anyone would do." But even as he said the words, he knew they weren't true. He wasn't just anyone. He had the means to help, and that made a difference. He thought about the life he had led, the cold, isolated world of a wealthy businessman, and realized that he had never truly helped anyone outside of his circle. Not like this. Not from the heart. Just as the thought crossed his mind, a woman walked over to them, her face warm with concern. "Can I help you?" she asked gently, looking at the girl. "I'm just waiting for my mom," the girl replied, her voice quiet. The woman nodded, her eyes softening. "We'll make sure you're safe here. Do you want some hot chocolate while you wait?" The girl's face brightened at the offer, and she nodded eagerly. As the woman went to fetch the hot chocolate, the man couldn't help but notice how different the shelter felt compared to the world he knew. The people here, though struggling, had a sense of community, a sense of care for one another that he had never experienced in his own life. And for the first time in years, he felt a longing to be part of that world. He didn't know it yet, but the journey he was about to take would lead him down a path that would change everything, for him, for the little girl, and for the mother he had yet to meet. I stood at the edge of the small table, watching the girl eagerly sip her hot chocolate. She had begun to relax a little, the tension easing from her shoulders as the warmth spread through her small frame. The shelter, though not much more than a modest building, seemed to offer something that the man had forgotten in his world of polished glass and marble, a sense of community. People here weren't just strangers passing through. They were connected, taking care of one another. A far cry from the cold business deals and lonely nights of his penthouse. The man glanced around the room, taking in the faces of the others, families huddled together, individuals sitting quietly, all of them seeking refuge from the harsh world outside. He found himself wondering how many of them had stories like the girl's, stories he had never stopped to consider in his busy life. His gaze shifted back to the little girl. She had stopped talking for a while, lost in her thoughts. He couldn't imagine what she must have been going through, but there was something in her eyes that tugged at his heart. The woman who had given them the hot chocolate returned, her presence kind and reassuring. She sat down across from the girl, her eyes softening as she took in the sight of the little one. "You're safe here," she said gently, her voice filled with warmth. "Do you want to tell me what happened? Why your mom isn't home?" The girl hesitated, her eyes welling up with tears. She wiped them away quickly, trying to keep her composure. "She was supposed to pick me up from school yesterday," she whispered. "She never came." And when I called her, she didn't answer. The woman nodded, her face full of understanding. It's okay to be scared, she said softly. We'll figure this out. The man, who had been silent up until now, felt a sudden urge to speak. Do you have any idea where she might be? He asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. The girl shook her head, her voice breaking as she spoke. No, I don't know. I've been waiting here because she said she'd come. But she hasn't. The words hit the man like a sudden wave. He didn't know what it felt like to wait for someone who might not return, but hearing the girl's fear made his heart ache. He looked at her, a mixture of sympathy and helplessness in his eyes. The woman sitting across from them stood up. We'll call the authorities, she said, her voice calm but firm. We'll make sure she's found, okay? The little girl nodded, her eyes still filled with uncertainty. The man watched her, feeling a strange pull in his chest. He had been living his life surrounded by people who only cared about power and wealth, but in this moment, he felt something he had never expected, the desire to protect. As the woman made the call, the man found himself wondering how he could help, how he could make a difference in this little girl's life. But as much as he wanted to do something, he couldn't help but feel helpless. His world had always been about control, about making things happen with a single call or a signed contract. But this was different. As the hours passed, and the girl began to fall asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, the man sat quietly beside her, staring out the window. He couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change him. It already had. He had seen the way the world worked for the first time from a different perspective, the world of those who had nothing but hope and each other. The phone rang, and the woman returned, her expression serious but hopeful. We have good news, she said softly. They found her. She's okay. She's been in an accident, but she's alive. The relief that washed over the girl's face was immediate. She sat up, her eyes wide with disbelief. My mom is okay? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman nodded, a gentle smile on her face. She's going to be just fine. The man, who had been so lost in his own thoughts, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. The girl had found her mother, and somehow, he had found a part of himself he didn't know was missing. The news that the girl's mother was safe spread like a warm wave through the shelter. She sat up, her eyes wide with disbelief, and the relief was evident on her face. The man watched as the woman explained the situation to the little girl, her gentle voice reassuring the child with each word. Your mom's okay. She had a car accident, but she's alive, and she's at the hospital now. The girl's lips trembled as she whispered, I can see her. Yes, the woman replied, smiling softly. You can see her soon, once she's settled. The man, who had been standing at the window, felt a shift in the air around him. The world outside, with its snowflakes drifting lazily down, seemed a little less cold, a little less distant. He had never considered himself a man of deep feelings. His life had been about control, wealth, power, things that could be acquired with a well-placed phone call or an executive decision. But tonight, the events had opened something in him, something he hadn't known was there. Watching this little girl's tear-streaked face, filled with hope, had stirred something he couldn't ignore. He had done what he could for her, but he felt he needed to do more. Do you want me to take you to the hospital? He asked, his voice sounding steadier than he felt. The girl looked at him, her wide eyes searching his face. You can do that? She asked, as if the idea of someone offering to help her so freely was foreign to her. The man nodded, his jaw setting with determination. Of course. I'll take you to her. The little girl's face broke into a hesitant smile, the first real smile he had seen from her. Thank you, she said quietly. He could tell she was still trying to process everything, but there was a relief in her voice that made his heart soften. He turned to the woman, who had been standing quietly by, observing the exchange. We'll be fine, he said, offering her a reassuring smile. I'll make sure she gets there safely. As he led the girl to his car, he noticed how small her hand was as she gripped his, trusting him without hesitation. It felt strange to him, the weight of responsibility that was now placed on him, yet it also felt natural. The drive to the hospital was filled with quiet, the girl staring out the window, lost in her thoughts. The man, who had once been so self-absorbed, found himself glancing at her every now and then, wondering how he could help more. He had wealth, he had influence, but none of that mattered in the face of what this girl had been through. He wanted to do more, to give her a sense of security, to make her feel safe, just for once. When they arrived at the hospital, the man parked and got out, opening the door for the girl. Together, they walked through the hospital's doors, the bright lights and sterile smell of antiseptic filling the air. He could sense the tension in the girl, the way her small frame seemed to shrink as they walked through the corridors. But as they approached the room where her mother was resting, the girl's pace quickened. The door opened, and inside, a woman lay in a hospital bed, her face pale but alive. The moment the girl saw her mother, she rushed to her side, tears flooding her eyes. "Mom," she cried, her voice cracking. The woman opened her eyes slowly, her face breaking into a soft smile as she reached out to her daughter. "Sweetheart," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible. "I'm okay. I'm here." The man stood back, watching the emotional reunion between mother and daughter, his heart swelling with an unfamiliar warmth. This was what mattered. This connection, this love, this bond that nothing could break. The world outside no longer felt so cold. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was where he was supposed to be. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of the monitors and the sound of the mother's labored breathing. The man stood at the doorway, watching as the little girl sat beside her mother's bed, clutching her hand tightly. The woman, though pale and exhausted, smiled weakly, brushing a lock of her daughter's hair behind her ear. It was a moment of tenderness amidst the chaos, and the man couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for the bond between them. The little girl looked up at him and gave him a small, grateful smile, her eyes still filled with tears. "Thank you for bringing me here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what I would have done without you." The man nodded, his heart heavy with emotion. He hadn't expected to feel this way, to become so involved in the life of a stranger, but somehow, this little girl and her mother had found a way into his heart. As the hours passed, the hospital room remained calm, the world outside forgotten as the man quietly observed the mother and daughter. He had made the decision to stay with them, to make sure they were safe. He couldn't just leave them now, not after everything that had happened. His thoughts drifted back to his own life, to the cold, empty nights in his penthouse, to the business deals that filled his days but never truly satisfied him. He had everything, or so he thought, but now, he realized that what he had been missing all along was the simple act of connection, of being there for someone who needed him. As the night grew late, the little girl yawned and leaned her head against her mother's side, drifting off to sleep. The mother's eyes fluttered closed, exhaustion taking over as well. The man quietly slipped out of the room and made his way to the hospital lobby, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't leave things like this. There was more he could do for them, more he wanted to do. The next morning, he returned to the hospital, his mind made up. He had contacted a private nurse, someone who could help care for the mother as she recovered, and he had arranged for a small apartment near the hospital so the mother and daughter wouldn't have to worry about where they would go next. He walked into the room with a sense of determination, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. The mother looked up as he entered, a look of surprise on her face. "You don't have to do all of this," she said softly, her voice still weak. "You've already done so much for us." The man smiled, sitting down next to her bed. "I want to do more," he said quietly. "I want to make sure you're both okay. You don't have to worry about anything anymore." The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, and for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened seemed to lift. As the days went by, the little girl and her mother slowly began to recover. The mother's condition improved, and the little girl's laughter, which had been absent for so long, returned. The man, who had once lived for nothing more than wealth and status, found himself becoming a part of their world, not out of obligation, but because he truly cared. He spent his days at the hospital, helping in any way he could, and in the evenings, he would take the little girl to the park, letting her play and laugh freely. It was a simple life, but it felt richer than anything he had ever known. One afternoon, as the sun was setting, the man stood at the edge of the park, watching the little girl run around with other children. He felt a sense of peace wash over him, a feeling he had never experienced before. The sound of laughter filled the air, and for the first time in years, he felt truly content. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He had found something that money could never buy. It was the simple joy of being there for someone, of giving without expecting anything in return, of making a difference in the life of another. As the little girl ran towards him, her face lit up with excitement. He smiled, realizing that this was what he had been missing all along. As the days went by, the bond between the man, the little girl, and her mother grew stronger. The hospital room had become a place of healing, not just physically, but emotionally as well. The man spent more time with them, helping with whatever they needed, and each day, he found himself drawn deeper into their world. The little girl, once so quiet and distant, now smiled and laughed more, her spirit slowly returning. Her mother, too, was starting to regain her strength. The days of uncertainty and fear were beginning to feel like a distant memory. One afternoon, after another successful round of physical therapy for the mother, the man sat with them in the small hospital room, watching the little girl play with her toys. Her laughter was like music to his ears, and he realized how much he had missed hearing such joy in his life. He had spent so many years chasing success and wealth, but now, surrounded by these two people, he realized that none of that mattered. His heart felt lighter than it had in a long time. The little girl looked up at him, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Are we going to stay here forever?" she asked, her voice soft. The man smiled, a feeling of warmth spreading through him. "No, sweetie," he said gently. "You and your mom are going to have a place of your own, somewhere safe and comfortable. You won't have to worry anymore." The girl nodded, satisfied with the answer, and returned to her toys. The man's gaze shifted to the woman, who was sitting up in bed, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You've done so much for us," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. "We'll never be able to thank you enough." He shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad I could help." He meant it, too. Helping them had become something more than a simple act of charity. It had become a part of him. He had found purpose in their lives, something he had been missing for years. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the window, the man stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. The world outside was still full of noise and chaos, but inside this small hospital room, there was peace. The kind of peace that only comes from truly connecting with another person. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that peace inside himself. The following days were filled with small steps toward recovery. The little girl was getting back to her normal self, and her mother was growing stronger with each passing day. The man, despite his earlier uncertainty, had found his place among them. It was clear to him now that he couldn't walk away. His life had been changed, and he wanted to be there for them, not just for a short time, but for the long haul. One afternoon, as he was walking out of the hospital, he received a call. It was from one of his business associates, asking him to attend an important meeting. The man hesitated for a moment, looking back at the hospital building, then back at his phone. He knew he had to go, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The world of business, the world of wealth and power, had always been his focus, but now, the thought of returning to that world felt empty. He had found something more meaningful, something more lasting, in the people he had come to care for. He glanced at his watch, then made a decision. He sent a quick reply to his associate, telling them he wouldn't be attending the meeting. Instead, he turned around and headed back to the hospital. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, he knew exactly where he was supposed to be. The days continued to pass in a blur, and with each one, the bond between the man, the little girl, and her mother grew even stronger. The man found himself thinking less and less about the business meetings and conferences that once dominated his life. Instead, his thoughts were consumed with the well-being of the mother and daughter. His heart had shifted in ways he never thought possible. The little girl had become the bright light in his life, and her mother, though weary from the accident, had become someone he admired deeply. They had both shown him something he had long forgotten: the importance of love, connection, and truly caring for others. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, the man took the little girl to the park. He watched as she ran, laughing and playing with the other children. She had come so far in such a short time. Just a few weeks ago, she had been terrified and alone, but now, she was joyful and full of life. The man sat on a nearby bench, his heart swelling with pride. He had never imagined he would feel this way, but watching her, it was as if a piece of him that had been missing was now filled. His thoughts drifted to her mother, who was recovering steadily, her strength returning each day. The woman had always been kind and strong, even in the face of adversity. The man had seen how she took care of her daughter, how she kept her spirit up despite the hardships they had faced. He admired her resilience more than he could express. As the little girl ran toward him, her face flushed with excitement, he couldn't help but smile. "Are you ready to go home?" he asked, standing up and brushing off the park bench. The girl nodded enthusiastically, and together, they walked back to the apartment he had arranged for them. He had made sure that everything was set up, safe, comfortable, and warm. He had even set aside a little space for the girl to play, something he thought would make her feel more at home. When they arrived, the girl rushed inside, eager to show her mother the small, colorful room. The mother smiled, her eyes brightening as she took in the new surroundings. "You did all this for us?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. The man nodded. "I wanted to make sure you both had a safe place to call home." The mother reached out, her hand resting gently on his arm. "You've done so much for us," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We don't know how to thank you." The man smiled softly, a humble warmth in his heart. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad to see you both happy." It was a simple statement, but it carried so much more weight than words could express. Over the next few days, the man continued to support the mother and daughter in every way he could. He made sure they had everything they needed, but more importantly, he was there for them, emotionally, physically, and mentally. They had become his family in a way that was impossible to explain. One evening, as he sat with the mother, talking about her recovery and the plans for the future, he found himself growing more and more attached. He had always been a man who valued independence, who prided himself on his ability to handle everything on his own. But now, with them, he felt a deep sense of belonging. There was no longer any desire to return to his old life. The world of wealth and power had never felt so empty. The world he had found with the little girl and her mother was full of warmth, love, and purpose. As he looked at them both, he realized that he had found something he hadn't even known he was searching for, a family, not by blood, but by choice. He had chosen to be part of their lives, and in doing so, he had found a piece of himself he had long forgotten. And for the first time in a long time, he felt complete. As the days passed, the bond between the man, the little girl, and her mother only grew stronger. The warmth in their small apartment was a constant reminder of the new life they were building together, far from the cold isolation that had once defined the man's existence. One evening, after dinner, the little girl tugged at his sleeve, a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. "Can we go to the park tomorrow? You promised we could go after I finished my homework," she said, her voice full of hope. The man smiled, remembering the promise he had made, and nodded. "Of course, we'll go first thing in the morning. I'll bring the ball, and we can play together," he said. The girl beamed, jumping up and down with joy. Her laughter was like music to his ears, a sound he cherished more with each passing day. The following morning, as promised, they headed to the park. The man had learned to enjoy these moments more than he had ever enjoyed his busy, high-powered days of meetings and deadlines. He watched as the little girl ran ahead of him, her energy boundless as she kicked the ball toward him. He had forgotten what it felt like to be so carefree, so completely in the moment. As they played, the girl looked up at him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think my mom will be better soon?" she asked, her voice quiet. The man paused, looking at her with understanding. "She's already getting stronger," he said gently. "And every day she gets a little better. Soon, she'll be able to do all the things she used to do. You'll see." The girl smiled, her face lighting up. "I can't wait for her to be able to take me to school again." The man chuckled softly. "And I bet she can't wait for that either." As the sun began to set, they walked home together, the little girl's hand in his. The warmth between them was something the man had never expected to find. But now, it was undeniable. The days spent with the mother and daughter had changed him in ways he could never have predicted. They had given him a sense of purpose, a feeling of belonging that his wealth and status had never provided. That night, as they sat around the table for dinner, the mother looked at him, her eyes full of appreciation. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You've given us more than we could ever ask for. You've given us hope." The man shook his head, a modest smile on his lips. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." But even as he said the words, he knew it wasn't true. He wasn't just anyone. He had done more than he ever thought possible for people he had once considered strangers. And in doing so, he had discovered a part of himself he never knew existed. The next morning, he received a call from his business partner. They needed him to attend a meeting, an important one that could determine the future of the company. As he listened to the details, his mind wandered. For a moment, he considered going. After all, his business was his life, wasn't it? But as he looked over at the little girl, who was drawing pictures at the kitchen table, and then at the mother, sitting comfortably in the living room, a thought crossed his mind. This was where he was needed. This was where he belonged. He hung up the phone without a second thought, his decision made. He wasn't going back to that world. Not now, not ever. He had found something far more valuable, something that no amount of money could ever buy. He had found a family, a place where he was truly needed, and for the first time, he understood what it meant to be truly alive. Weeks passed, and life for the little girl, her mother, and the man had settled into a routine. The mother's recovery was progressing steadily, and the little girl had once again found her joy, running through the small apartment with a laughter that filled the rooms. The man had never known how much he longed for the sound of genuine happiness, the kind that could only come from a child. He had become a constant presence in their lives, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Every day spent with them made him feel more complete than he had ever felt in his life. One afternoon, as they sat in the small park nearby, the little girl tugged at his sleeve, a mischievous grin on her face. "Do you know what today is?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with excitement. The man raised an eyebrow, a little confused. "No, what is it?" he asked. "It's my birthday," she exclaimed, her smile growing even wider. The man's eyes widened in realization. "I completely forgot," he said, almost in disbelief. "How could I forget your birthday?" The little girl giggled, shaking her head. "It's okay. I didn't expect anyone to remember, but you did." The man's heart swelled with affection for her. "Of course I remember. You're my family now, and family always remembers important days." As the little girl beamed up at him, the man felt a deep sense of pride. He had come so far from the man he once was, a man focused only on his work and his wealth. Now, he was focused on something far more meaningful. That night, they celebrated her birthday together, the three of them, just like a real family. The woman, still recovering but full of gratitude, helped the man bake a cake for her daughter. The little girl was overjoyed, her laughter filling the small apartment as she opened presents and played with her new toys. The man watched the two of them, his heart full of love and contentment. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to chase success or wealth. He had found something far more precious than anything money could buy. The next day, as he sat down with the woman to talk about the future, he found himself making a decision that felt right. "I want to help you both," he said softly. "I want to make sure you're taken care of, that you have everything you need. You deserve a better life, and I want to make that happen." The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "You've already done more than enough," she said. "You've given us hope. You've given us a future." The man smiled, a small, sincere smile. "No, I haven't done enough. I want to do more. I want you to know that you're not alone, not anymore." Over the next few weeks, the man began working on plans to help the woman get back on her feet. He used his resources to find a job for her, one that would allow her to support herself and her daughter. He even set up a small trust fund for the little girl's education. The woman and the little girl were overwhelmed by his generosity, but he insisted that it was the least he could do. He had found his true purpose in life, helping them, supporting them, and becoming part of the family he never thought he needed. As time passed, the little girl grew stronger, her laughter ringing through the apartment every day. And as the man looked at her, he knew he had found the one thing he had been searching for all along, a sense of belonging. He had become part of their world, not because of obligation, but because he truly cared. For the first time in years, he felt complete. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid. He had found love, family, and the kind of happiness that was more fulfilling than any amount of money could ever provide. And with that, he knew that everything he had done, everything he had given, had been worth it. This millionaire story takes you through the unexpected journey of a successful man who finds himself deeply connected to a mother and daughter in need of help. As their lives intertwine, the man discovers that true wealth isn't measured by money, but by love, care, and family. This is a heartwarming tale of transformation, where kindness and compassion lead to a life-changing bond. Along the way, the man redefines what it means to be truly rich, and in doing so, he finds the happiness he had been searching for all his life. From offering a helping hand to a little girl to providing support for her mother, this millionaire story shows how one small act of kindness can alter the course of many lives. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest rewards are found when we stop chasing wealth and start building meaningful connections with others. This millionaire story proves that money cannot buy the sense of fulfillment and joy that comes from being part of someone else's journey. In this compelling narrative, the transformation of a cold, isolated man into a loving figure in this little girl and her mother's life offers a powerful message about the importance of community, family, and compassion. The story of how this millionaire turned his life around by offering unconditional support will inspire anyone who believes in the power of kindness and human connection. Dive into this heartwarming millionaire story and discover the true meaning of wealth.